In a laboratory, 8 hungry pigeons were placed in 8 separate cages. At fixed time intervals, an automatic machine dropped food into each cage, completely independent of anything the bird did. But within minutes, 6 of the 8 birds began performing strange, repetitive behaviors. One spun in circles, one bobbed its head into a corner, one hopped from side to side. The question is, why would 6 unrelated animals each develop a different personal ritual, just to receive the exact same reward? Welcome back to the channel. This experiment was run in 1948 by B.F. Skinner, the psychologist widely regarded as the father of modern behavioral psychology. Skinner titled the study, Superstition in the Pigeon, and it became one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology. The setup was simple. A machine dropped food into the cage at a fixed interval, regardless of what the pigeon happened to be doing at that exact moment. But the brains of animals, and of humans, are wired to search for a cause behind every outcome, even when no real cause exists. If a pigeon happened to be spinning in a circle right when food appeared, it became slightly more likely to spin again next time. Its brain assumed that action had caused the reward. And once that behavior repeated more often, the odds of it coincidentally lining up with the next food drop also increased, creating a self-reinforcing loop. Within minutes, a completely random action had turned into a precise, repeated ritual, as if the animal were certain it held the key to getting fed. Skinner called this superstitious behavior, not because the pigeon had any religious thought, but because the underlying mechanism was identical to how humans form superstitions. He compared it to something very familiar. A gambler who wins big on a first try often repeats the exact same actions from that win, sitting in the same seat, holding the cards the same way, wearing the same outfit. Not because they blindly believe in magic, but because their brain unconsciously linked a random action to a good outcome, the exact mechanism at work in the pigeon's cage. This is the foundation of operant conditioning, the core principle of the entire school of behavioral psychology that Skinner devoted his career to studying. The principle is simple. A behavior followed by a reward tends to be repeated more often in the future, whether or not the link between behavior and reward is actually real. But the most interesting part of the experiment didn't stop there. Skinner went on to test different feeding schedules, and found something even more surprising. When food was delivered at a fixed, predictable interval, the pigeon's behavior was fairly stable, but also faded quickly once the reward stopped appearing. But when food was delivered randomly, unpredictably, the animal's behavior became more intense, more frequent, and far harder to extinguish, even after the reward stopped completely. In other words, uncertainty, not certainty, is what makes a behavior take the deepest root in the brain. This finding, published back in 1948, became the theoretical foundation for one of the most addictive industries of the 20th century, the casino. Slot machine designers understand this principle very well. They deliberately program rewards to appear at random rates, not for fairness, but because it's the most effective way to keep players pulling the lever. Researcher Natasha Schull, in her book Addiction by Design, describes in detail how the casino industry applies the exact random reinforcement principle Skinner first discovered in pigeons. But casinos aren't the only place applying this principle in the 21st century. There's another device, one nearly everyone carries every day, running on the exact same mechanism. It's the smartphone in your pocket. Every time you pull down to refresh your feed, you're performing the exact same action a pigeon once performed in a 1948 lab cage. Sometimes you pull down and there's something interesting. Sometimes there isn't. That unpredictability, not the content itself, is what makes your finger want to pull again. Social media notifications run on the same principle, sometimes an exciting like, sometimes a meaningless ad, and because you can't know in advance, your brain is compelled to check. If an app notified you with 100% accuracy every single time there was something worthwhile, you'd check far less. Because the brain doesn't need to keep scanning once everything becomes predictable. But because the reward arrives randomly, the act of checking your phone, just like the pigeon spinning, becomes an extremely hard behavior to extinguish, even when you consciously want to stop. This isn't a coincidence. Several former tech product engineers have openly admitted they were trained on Skinner's own operant conditioning principles when building notification and news feed features. Tech ethicist Tristan Harris, a former Google employee, calls this turning billions of phones around the world into miniature slot machines that fit right in everyone's pocket. What's notable is that neither the pigeons, nor most social media users, are consciously aware of what's actually driving their behavior. The pigeon believes it's doing something right by spinning. Many of us believe we're checking an important message, while, most of the time, we're simply reacting to the exact same psychological mechanism. This doesn't mean human willpower is weak, or that technology is entirely evil. It simply means we're playing a psychological game whose rules were designed using very real scientific principles. And once we understand those rules, we finally have a real chance to choose to play differently, instead of continuing to react unconsciously, like a pigeon in a lab cage. This is what Skinner's 1948 experiment reveals. If we look beyond the pigeons themselves, human behavior, most of the time, is not driven by conscious reasoning. It's driven by a reinforcement schedule running quietly in the background, one we rarely even notice exists. What matters isn't that we get conditioned. Humans naturally learn through the consequences of their actions. What matters is who is actively designing that reinforcement schedule, and for what purpose. For the pigeon in the lab, no one intentionally deceived it. The machine simply dropped food at random. But for the app on your phone, that randomness is often deliberately engineered by teams who understand behavioral psychology very well. Recognizing this doesn't make you instantly immune to the effect. But it creates a small pause, right at the moment before your finger habitually pulls the screen down again. And that small pause, it turns out, is the biggest difference between a pigeon reacting completely unconsciously and a human capable of recognizing the very mechanism running inside their own mind. This isn't a call to throw away your phone, or treat every app as an enemy. It's a reminder: know which game you're playing, before that game takes over your time completely. You can start with something very small. Notice yourself the next time your hand automatically reaches for your phone, not because there's something you need to do, but because of a vague, unexplained urge. Ask yourself, am I checking because I genuinely need information, or am I just repeating my own version of the spinning dance, waiting for a reward that may or may not come? That single question, asked at the right moment, is already a bigger step forward than any of the 6 pigeons from 1948 ever got to take, creatures that never had the chance to ask themselves why they were spinning. You could try one small change today: turn off notifications that aren't genuinely important, or switch your phone display to grayscale, reducing the unexpected reward cues apps use to pull you back in. Not to become a technology-avoiding stoic, but to take back your own agency, instead of letting a random reinforcement schedule quietly make the choice for you, hundreds of times a day. Skinner's experiment, in the end, was never really a story about pigeons. It's a mirror, showing exactly how the human brain works, just simplified to where it's easy to observe. And once you've seen that mirror, it's hard to look at your next phone notification quite the same way again, without a fleeting thought of 6 pigeons, spinning in circles in a lab, all those years ago. So tell me, have you noticed your own version of this random reinforcement dance? A habit you repeat without really knowing why? Write it in the comments below. Thanks for spending 10 minutes with me today. See you next time.